Hey everyone, Dr. Short, the personalized learning professor here, and on this episode, we're going to do some detective work to figure out exactly what is personalized learning. What is it? So, grab your magnifying glass and your deer stalkers, because this episode is afoot. Word of warning before we get started today. This is a longer than normal episode. We are going to spend some time going through over 10 different definitions of personalized learning, dating back to the first time the United States Department of Education defined it in 2010. So if you want to skip all of that and just find out how I'm defining personalized learning and why, go ahead, go to the video description and skip to the chapter called Elephants, Onions, and Parfaits. However, if you're interested in all those definitions, stick around because we're going to start now. Let's go ahead and go to the slides. So I wanted to start off with this. In 2020, Shimshak Inspector published their own review, a systematic review of personalized learning terms. And you can see here the definition that they started with. They started with a definition of personalized learning, which requires a digital learning environment to be adaptive to individual knowledge, experience, and interests, and to be effective and efficient in supporting and promoting desired learning outcomes. I wanted to present this because there have been these kinds of reviews done before that look at how is personalized learning being defined, and can we figure out how to tie all of these definitions together? Unfortunately, Shimshak Inspector found that there were a lot of different definitions. They had a lot of different things in common, but there really wasn't enough to create a definitive definition. This is what Shimshak Inspector had to say about their findings. They said personalized learning cannot be a solution to learning until it is defined better and developed more thoroughly. I completely agree. We need to be able to be on the same page if we're going to discuss personalized learning in a way that is at all productive. Right now, we say personalized learning and it can mean so many different things, something that they highlighted. Personalized learning for everyone looks different according to the needs and goals of the individual. Yes, people define personalized learning differently based on how they want to personalize, based on how they're wanting to use personalization. And while that is fine to operationalize a term like that, it creates some problems because it doesn't mean that we can have a common shared discussion and know what we mean when we say, I personalize learning for my students. We have answered some of the critical research questions, including the issues with different terms that have been used for personalized learning, components of personalized learning, and obstacles to the development of personalized learning. We need more research to be done about personalized learning. We also need the involvement of experts in the field, educators, pedagogues, researchers, software engineers, and programmers to create teams to work on the same goal to produce stable, unified, personalized learning systems and models. One of the things I loved about this statement is that they recognize that personalized learning is a system and a model. I think that is key to understanding the way that personalized learning works. It is part of a system. It is a strategical model. And because of that, it has lots of intricate parts. It has lots of different core attributes. And so we need to look at it as a system. We need to identify some of those core attributes in order to really pin down what it is we mean when we say we are personalizing learning. It was found that adaptive and personalized learning systems seem to evolve as technology develops. However, a unified agreement on the components needed to be included in personalized learning models is still needed. This is one of the things I'm attempting to do with this video. I want to talk about some of those components that make up personalized learning. There may be more than what I talk about in this video, and I'll talk about how those components work together in a later video when I discuss the personalized learning design framework. But for this video, it's important that we recognize those components as part of our definition for personalized learning. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and look at those definitions of personalized learning, the way it's been defined since 2010 in various ways by various stakeholders. And so to start, I want to look at the definition that was used in the 2010 National Educational Technology Plan from the U.S. Department of Education. They defined personalized learning thusly. They said personalization refers to instruction that is paced to learning needs, tailored to learning preferences, and tailored to specific interests of different learners. In an environment that is fully personalized, the learning objectives and content, as well as the method and pace, may all vary. So, personalization encompasses differentiation and individualization. Okay, well, this becomes problematic, right? If personalization includes these other strategies, differentiation and individualization, then we have created a very broad umbrella definition for personalized learning. Any adaptation of learning becomes personalized learning. And so we need to have a clearer understanding of the way in which those things are being adapted. And just to understand their definition, we need to know exactly what are individualization and what are differentiation. Fortunately, they define those as well. They say differentiation refers to instruction that is tailored to the learning preferences of different learners. Learning goals are the same for all students, but the method or approach of instruction varies according to the preferences of each student or what research has found works best for students like them. Individualization refers to instruction that is paced to the learning needs of different learners. Learning goals are the same for all students, but students can progress through the material at different speeds according to their learning needs. So in this one, the pace is being differentiated, but the content, the learning objectives, are all the same for every learner. If we put all of these pieces together, the personalization and the individualization and the differentiation, with this 2010 definition, we end up with a monstrosity that looks something like this. Personalization refers to instruction that is paced to learning needs, tailored to learning preferences, and tailored to specific interests of different learners. In an environment that is fully personalized, the learning objectives and content, as well as the method and pace, may all vary. Personalized learning goals are the same for all students, but the method or approach of instruction varies according to the preferences of each student or what research has found works best for students like them, and or students can progress through the material at different speeds according to their learning needs. For example, students might take longer to progress through a given topic, skip topics that cover information they already know, or repeat topics they need more help on. That is a lot. It is too much. And so in 2017, they rewrote the National Education Technology Plan with an update to their definition of personalized learning. They made it much more concise, and they added a very important piece that was missing from the 2010 definition. This is that 2017 definition. Personalized learning refers to instruction in which the pace of learning and the instructional approach are optimized for the needs of each learner. Learning objectives, instructional approaches, and instructional content, and its sequencing, may all vary based on learner needs. So they took everything that they said in 2010 and they boiled it down to, you know what, personalized learning is adapting learning in these ways. Then they added this. In addition, learning activities are meaningful and relevant to learners, driven by their interests, and often self-initiated. And I think this is a really important addition. I think one of the components, one of the core attributes, one of the sub-layers of personalized learning that we're going to talk about is student ownership and agency. To what extent are students, are the learners, able to control the way in which that learning is being adapted? Are learners being given different instructional materials and the teacher is still largely in control of those adaptations? Or are the learners able to increase their own agency and ownership, maybe by selecting from limited options, or giving the freedom to pursue their own learning goals, their own learning objectives, free to come up with their own ways to assess themselves and show understanding. All in all, if we were to take these two different definitions from the National Educational Technology Plans produced by the United States Department of Education, we would find that their definition of personalized learning has the following core attributes. It is paced to fit learners' needs. That's mentioned in both definitions. It's tailored to learners' preferences. This was added in the later definition. Both definitions mention that it's tailored to learners' interests, that learning objectives are personalized, learning methods and approaches are personalized, and that the content is personalized. The second definition added in the sequencing or path. Both definitions seem to suggest that it is initiated by the educator, with the second definition also pointing out that it can be initiated by the learner. Now, this is an important point. while these definitions don't specifically say that the educator is the one doing the personalized learning, while they don't directly state that, we can assume that when they say it is adapted, that either the educator, the teacher, the instructional designer, maybe even an instructional system is creating that adaptation, is doing the adapting. So we're going to say initiated by the educator anytime they just kind of have a passive, it is adapted statement as part of the definition. So these definitions jump from 2010 to 2017. Now, there were lots of definitions that came out between those years. So let's go back and fill in some of the gaps. So this is a 2013 definition from the International Association for K-12 Online Learning. They state personalized learning is tailoring learning for each student's strengths, needs, and interests. So this is a little different from what we saw with the previous definitions, including enabling student voice and choice in what, how, when, and where they learn, to provide flexibility and support to ensure mastery of the highest standards possible. So let's look at some of the things that this definition uses as those core attributes of personalized learning. First, it's tailoring learning for each student's strengths, needs, and interests. Now, this is a little different than what we saw previously. So let's add that to our characteristic of personalized learning list. It's tailored to learners' needs. So that's a little different than paced to fit learners' needs, so I'm going to add it as a new row. Tailored to learners' strengths, abilities, and weaknesses. Well, that still might be different than their preferences or their interests, so we'll add that row. Again, it still seems to be suggested that it's initiated by the educator, even though it's kind of like a passive suggestion. They don't say that the educator is doing it, but they also don't say at the beginning that students are the one that's doing it. They do add that, however, later in the definition, enabling student voice and choice. They go on to explain what that voice and choice is in. So not only what is being personalized, but how it's being personalized, and when and where it's being personalized. The other thing they add, which is kind of interesting, is the purpose behind it. It's to ensure mastery of the highest standards possible. So one could say that if you are personalizing, but your personalizing is not based on trying to ensure mastery of highest standards possible, that you're not personalizing according to their definition. So if I'm trying to personalize to increase my learner's agency and ownership, if it's not related to the learning outcomes, under this definition, it wouldn't be personalized learning. Let's look at where we stand so far on identifying the key attributes of personalized learning. You can see here I've had to break the table into two columns in order to keep all of the things straight. I also added a definition count just so as we go through these we can know how many things we've talked about. So content is personalized, we're adding that there. It's initiated by the learner, like I said, they do mention that. But then we add ensure mastery and allowing for the personalization of time and place, or when and where content is being mastered or learning is happening. The next definition, 2014, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, as well as several other nonprofit organizations. Personalized learning seeks to accelerate student learning by tailoring the instructional environment. Similar language to what we've seen before. What, when, how, and where students learn. We have those dimensions included again that we saw in the 2013 definition. To address the individual needs, skills, and interests of each student, students can take ownership over their own learning while also developing deep personal connections with each other, their teachers, or other adults. So again, we're starting to see different attributes focused on as part of this definition. We still have the accelerate student learning. We have this idea that it's meant to help students learn better. We have the idea of tailoring the instructional environment. Again, it doesn't say who or what is doing the tailoring in this case. Later, it does say students can take ownership. We have those dimensions. It's what is being personalized, when it's being personalized, how and where. Address individual needs, skills, and interests. We've seen all of those in definitions before. Students are taking ownership, so we still have that student agency piece, allowing learners to initiate some of the adaptations, while developing deep personal connections. This is a new piece to the definition. This is not something we had previously seen. This idea that personalized learning includes this specific outcome. So now it's not just learning outcomes, but it's also these outcomes related to relationships, socio-emotional outcomes, learner profile outcomes. And so, even here we see that the definition is becoming even more inclusive. or even more broad in what it's trying to accomplish. So if we go ahead and chart that, here's what we see. You can see I've added counts to pacing, to tailoring on needs, tailoring on strengths and abilities, tailoring on interests, methods and approaches being personalized, content being personalized, the what, initiated by the educator and or the learner, when and where, and then we added a new row, developing deep connections. Next, we have this definition from the National Center for Learning Disabilities in 2015. So here we're saying students' learning experiences, and again, we're giving the dimensions for that, the what they learn, how, when, and where they learn it, are tailored to their individual needs, skills, and interests, and enable them to take ownership of their learning. So a lot of things that we've seen before. Although where, how, and when they learn might vary according to their needs, students also develop deep connections to each other, their teachers, and other adults. So largely we're seeing this definition adapted from the same definition that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation used. This is not uncommon. Once organizations want to start funding something, people will adopt the definitions that are supported by money. We still have what they learn, how, we have the when and where. It's tailored to individual needs, skills, and interests. We have the focus on student ownership, and we still have that focus on deep connections. So when we chart this, really we're supporting those same things we saw from the previous definition. This was really nothing new, but I thought it was interesting to look at, hey, here's a different organization, and they're using that same definition. They're willing to support that same thought process. 2018, so we're now moving beyond the 2017 National Educational Technology Plan definition. This is the Center on Reinventing Public Education. Personalized learning, it's big ideas, giving students more freedom and control over their learning, allowing students to move at their own pace, letting students' interests and talents drive what they learn. This resonates with many parents, students, and educators. Again, we see a lot of the same key characteristics. Emphasis on student agency, emphasis on pace, emphasis on student interest and students' talents or their abilities. And so when we chart this one, we can start to see some things emerge as prevalent. Initiated by the learner, paced to fit learners' needs, tailored to learners' strengths, tailored to learners' interests. This continues. This is the Christensen Institute's definition of personalized learning, which is separate from their definition of blended learning, which many will agree includes personalized learning within it. That is a discussion for another episode. But this definition of personalized learning says that in the current educational conversation, personalized learning is a pedagogical philosophy tending to refer to a host of efforts that is important to understand. They are recognizing now in 2019 that there are lots of different ways of personalizing. A host of efforts and models that tailor learning and development to the individual student based on beliefs of what outcomes we want students to reach and how to best help them get there. So again, similar language, tailor learning and development to the individual student and looking at learner outcomes. So we add this, initiated by the educator, and we're hearkening back to that earlier idea of ensuring mastery. There's some kind of learning outcome that is expected from the personalization. All right, how are you hanging in there? Do you need to pause the video, go get a drink? Are you writing these definitions down? If not, that's okay. I'll provide links to them below. But I know that it's long. We're almost done. You know, remember I said we're going to do more than 10. We have the definition count. We're getting there. Hang in there, you're close. So here's another definition from 2019. This is from Knowledge Works, and you might notice that they're adding another layer to the way they think about personalized learning. That piece that they are adding here is that now it also has to be engaging for us to call it personalized learning. It means creating engaging learning experiences. So they're still shifting that focus while maintaining some of the core attributes that we've seen before, customized to each student's strengths, needs, and interests. So when we chart this, we can see it's tailored to needs. We're still hearkening back to that. Still tailoring to strengths, abilities, and weaknesses, tailoring to learners' interests. It still seems to be initiated by some kind of invisible educator or system because it doesn't specifically state who is creating the engaging materials. But now we've added a new row. We are adding a new characteristic of personalized learning. It has to also be engaging. I feel as if I would be remiss if I didn't include my own previous definition of personalized learning. This is a definition I used with Dr. Graham, Dr. Borup, and Dr. Archambault when we wrote the K-12 Blended Teaching Guidebook. This is the definition that we use. We broke it down, personalized learning down into two components. One, customization, that tailoring and customizing of learning experiences to individual students' needs and interests, and a learner agency piece, giving students some element control over their own learning experience. We also include dimensions over which students can control their learning. Some customization of the goals, time, place, pace, and or path of their learning experience. So again, we have the tailoring or customizing piece. We talk about it still being based on students' needs or their abilities and their interest. We kind of group ability and need into just that singular needs. We talk about giving students some element of control, so we still have that student agency piece. And then we include these dimensions: goals, time and place, which we've seen before, pace, which we've seen before, and path, which we haven't seen that term used before, but we have seen that idea. Updating our chart again, paced to fit learners' needs, that's that pace element, tailored to learners' needs, tailored to their interests. Learning methods and approaches are personalized, that's really part of that path. Content is personalized, that is also part of personalizing a student's path. Sequencing or path is personalized, again, that is part of path. Initiated by the educator, we have that piece in there. Initiated by the learner, we have that agency piece in there. We included when and where in the dimensions of time and place, but we added that dimension of goals. Now we are saying that learners can also, to some extent, control their goals, and I will talk about what that looks like in another episode. This one, we're still just trying to come up with what is a unified definition for personalized learning. Here's a definition from 2021. This is the U.S. Department of Education Parent and Family Learning Guide. So this is another definition of personalized learning coming out of the U.S. Department of Education, although it is a slightly different part of the Department of Education than the definitions we've seen previously. Here we can see again, personalized learning is an educational approach, aims to customize learning. We see strengths, needs, skills, and interests. We also see that each students now get a learning plan. So some differences here, some changes and updates to the way that we're conceiving of personalized learning. Still customized, still based on strengths, needs, skills, and interests. But now each student gets a learning plan that's based on what they know and how they learn best. So let's look at how this definition tracks. Still tailored to needs, still tailored to strengths, abilities, or weaknesses. Learner preferences is working its way back in. Learner interests, so those are a little bit different. Preferences would be like the ways in which they prefer to learn, what some people might, again, call problematic learning styles. Whereas interests are really like, their hobbies, their goals for their own lives, the things that they're interested in non-academically. Learning methods and approaches are personalized, so the how, the what is personalized, the sequencing and path is personalized, and initiated by the educator. Leap innovations definition, another really concise one, trying to really figure out how can we boil this down to a simpler idea. Personalized learning is focused on, led with, and demonstrated by the learner, and is connected to career-relevant, real-world skills and opportunities. So we have the student agency piece. Now we're connecting it to career-relevant, real-world skills and opportunities. So even this is a slightly different focus. So here you can see tailored to learners' interests, initiated by the learner, and now a new row appearing behind me, providing real-world opportunities for the learners. 11 different definitions. I sorted these attributes by their prevalence, and so you can see 9 of 11 definitions talk about tailoring to learners' interests. 9 of 11 initiated by the educator. 7 of 11, content is personalized, the what. 7 of 11 is about increasing student ownership. 6 of 11, tailoring to their strengths, abilities, and weaknesses. 6 of 11, how students learn, the methods and approaches are adapted. 5, pace to fit learners' needs, and then you can see in the column above me, there's all sorts of other characteristics that appear. Some of them are kind of one-offs, including the one that I added with my co-authors in the K-12 blended teaching book about goals. And so all together, we can see there is lots of ideas about what is personalized learning. The question must be asked, why are there so many different definitions? Why do people keep defining and redefining personalized learning to suit what they think it is best? And really what I think it comes down to is the parable of the blind man and the elephant. And now, if you don't know this story, the way it works is that there are blind men approaching this elephant, but they're all touching a different part of it. So one reaches out and touches the trunk and says, "Oh, this must be a snake." Another reaches out and touches the elephant's ear and says, "I think this is a fan. Where are you getting a snake?" Another one reaches out and touches some of the legs and says, "Oh, well, these are clearly trees." Another reaches out and touches the side of the elephant and assumes that it's a wall. One reaches out and grabs the tail and thinks it's some kind of brush. Another grabs the tusk and thinks that it's a spear. All of them are grabbing different parts of the same creature, and if we all zoom out and we're able to, see this with full sight, we see that the creature is an elephant. But when they only see those specific core attributes, they don't get the whole picture. And that's really what we're seeing with definitions of personalized learning. Personalized learning has layers. It's like an onion or a parfait. With the elephant, some of these definitions are defining personalized learning based on the trunk and the tusk and the legs without thinking about the role that the ear and the side and the tail plays. And so if we need a definition, if we are to come up with a definition of personalized learning, we have to have a definition that accounts for the full elephant, that can allow for all of those layers to coexist, all of these different attributes to coexist. Now, this complexity is not surprising. In fact, there are researchers who can predict that this kind of complexity exists when any kind of new practice or strategy is introduced. In his 2013 book, An Architectural Approach to Instructional Design, Andy Gibbons had this to say about instructional strategies. Theorists who have strategy concepts to promote often use the term opportunistically to refer to their particular interests without cross-referencing their ideas with those of others. They're defining it by the trunk and the leg and the side without consulting those who are defining it by the tusk, the ear, and the tail. He adds, during strategy design, a designer specifies a variety of structures that are the constituents of events, which are intersections of goal, time, space, place, artifacts, activities, and social structure. There's this idea that within any kind of learning strategy, any kind of instructional strategy, that strategy is one layer in a whole, and that it has several sub-layers, and that we can't just try to broadly define it as a strategy, as a layer in its function, without also talking about the way that those sub-layers contribute to that function. To simplify this system down a little bit, Graham and Henry worked with Gibbons on developing models and theory for blended learning research, in a field that's very closely related to personalized learning, in a field that I have mentioned several times before. This is what they had to say. While Gibbons and Rogers defined 7 different design layers considered important to instructional design, we simplify these concepts to focus on just 2. Those 2 layers consist of design layers and their key propositions. And so we have the physical layer, which is the media layer that they are talking about, and then that pedagogical layer. And as I've been saying, that pedagogical layer has core attributes. The strategies have core attributes to them, and it's those core attributes that can lead to those learning outcomes. Okay, so you're saying, we get it. Personalized learning is a complex system. It has lots of moving pieces. How do we define it? What is the definition of personalized learning? Can we even create a definitive definition of personalized learning? Well, I think we can. And I think to create that definition, we have to acknowledge that it has 2 essential parts. And so let's look at the 2-part definition for personalized learning. That first part is this. Personalized learning is an instructional strategy that adapts learning to each learner's individual abilities, interests, or needs. I think everybody can agree that personalized learning does this. It's about adapting learning to the individual. And the individual has individual abilities, individual interests, and individual needs. However, we cannot stop there. This is a very broad definition still. And so we have to include part 2, which targets those sublayers, the core attributes of part 1. So part 2 is that as an instructional strategy, personalized learning consists of several core attributes related to what is being personalized or adapted, how it is being personalized or adapted, what information or data the adaptation is based on, and to what extent the learner controls the adaptation. Now, I'm not going to be so presumptuous as to say these encompass all of the core attributes, that there aren't other sub-layers at work here. But I think this gets at the majority of those sub-layers. These two parts get at the purpose of personalized learning and how it accomplishes that purpose. When we use these two parts, we can have a conversation about personalized learning that makes much more sense. We can all be on the same page when we talk about what we're doing and how we're doing it. So these pieces all come together to form what I call the personalized learning design framework, which I will talk about more in episode 5. This theory for instructional design or for instruction in general just talks about how all of these layers work together, how we can't just look at personalized learning as a simple strategy without talking about the core attributes and sublayers that make up that strategy. So these individual elements or core attributes or sublayers will all have their own episodes in the future, and they include what is being personalized, whether it's the learning objectives, the assessments, or the activities, how they are being personalized along the dimensions of goals, time, place, pace, and path, who is doing the personalization, whether it's controlled by the instructor, controlled by the learner, or controlled by some kind of software that is adaptive, the degree to which the personalization focuses on increasing learner agency. So we can look at the learner agency taxonomy that you see here. Are we starting to individualize the instruction, or are we starting to give learners more control over their own learning by allowing them to have some kind of limited choice or free choice and guiding them in making those choices? And of course, we also need to know what is the personalized learning being based on. What is the rationale for the adaptations that we are creating? And so we can use data such as the PAL data framework, which I will talk about in the next episode. And again, there may be more layers here. I'm not trying to presume that I have the all-encompassing view and definition of personalized learning, but I think I'm close. I think by saying that it has different core attributes related to these things, we can now start to have that conversation where we can define personalized learning for each other in the way that we use it. We can use these different core attributes to describe the ways in which we are designing personalized learning. And we can use these different core attributes to go into a personalized learning environment and evaluate the way in which it's personalizing the learning. In sum, when we talk about personalized learning, we have to be able to define it not just as an instructional strategy, but by the sublayers and core attributes that make up that strategy. We need to be able to identify not only that we're adapting instruction, but what is being adapted, how it's being adapted, who or what is making the adaptations, the levels to which learners are allowed to have control over those adaptations, and what those adaptations are based on. If we can remember those different sub-elements, it can allow us to have a shared definition and view of personalized learning. So what does that framework actually look like? What does it look like to actually be able to define and design and evaluate personalized learning based on this? Well, that's an episode for another time, probably episode 5. So go ahead, skip forward, check that episode out if you're curious about the personalized learning design framework and how it brings all of these pieces together. Until we meet again, if this episode has been helpful to you, please remember to like, subscribe, share it with others who you think could benefit from this information. If you want to cite this video for anything, there is an APA citation available to you in the description below. Until next time, I'm Dr. Short, the personalized learning professor, asking you to look for positive possibilities.